Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
She's toast. Absolute toast. So, did Kamala Harris just ruin her campaign? She appeared on The View yesterday, and in just 15 seconds, it could all be over. She was asked a question on the, and I remember this is a friendly atmosphere. These women are all in. They literally introduced her as the next president of the United States. And I want to remind you, as I always do, this show is part of the umbrella of ABC News, not ABC Entertainment, not ABC Daytime. ABC News introduced Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States. And Sunny Hostin asked one simple question.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Absolutely devastating. Absolutely devastating for many, many multiple reasons, not least of which she had to know this question was coming. How could she not know that at some point during this media blitz, she was going to be asked, what makes you different than Joe Biden? Would you have done anything different than Joe Biden? Now, I don't know, maybe part of her negotiated deal with Joe and Jill for her to be able to assume the nomination and take all those campaign funds and everything was that she would never, ever say anything negative or criticize anything that Joe Biden did. Maybe, but if so, she's a moron for taking a deal like that, because she spent the last 2 months trying to differentiate her economic policies from Joe Biden's policies. She's been saying things like, yeah, things cost too much. We got to do better. You elect me and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And everyone's like, well, if those are such good ideas, why isn't Joe doing them? Why aren't you doing them now? See, and that's where sort of the art of politics comes into play. I mean, she could easily, and by the way, the lowest of low-hanging fruit is Afghanistan. I mean, how hard is that? How hard is it for her to say, and again, you want to be respectful of Joe Biden, I guess, because you're still his vice president and he's still president, and you're trying to keep people together and you don't want to make a headline. But of course, she ended up making a headline for all the wrong reasons. Couldn't she have said something like, listen, not to second guess Joe Biden as commander in chief or how things went down in Afghanistan, but obviously, in retrospect, knowing now what we know and the tragedy of 13 lost American service members, having to do it all over again, if I were president, I would have tried to take a different approach in our pullout of Afghanistan. And I know that hindsight is 20/20, but we have that hindsight now. And knowing what happened, yes, I think at the very least, we should have done that differently. She can't even bring herself to that. She can't even bring herself to say that. This was so bad and so awful. Honestly, the View appearance was sort of going on while we were just finished when we came on the air yesterday for this show. And we looked at a couple of the clips and we were like, you know what? It's so boring because these ladies are just asking her stupid questions. They're all on her side. I don't even think much is going to come of this except this one clip. That was the only thing that we had pulled that we were maybe going to show. But it turns out this thing is so devastating. You want to know how devastating it is? You want to know how career-ending potentially this moment on The View was? Watch this.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
That's how devastating that moment is. That is now a Trump for president ad. They're acting like the American people were thrilled with everything under Joe Biden. They just thought he was too old. And they either believe that and they're so deluded and so out of it that they have no business being anywhere near power if they really do believe that. Or this is just a game they have to play. They have to continue this. Oh, we have the greatest economy in the world, and we've never been better off, and he's the greatest president. It's just he had just gotten up there in age, and it was time for a new generation. But this woman has been campaigning for the last 2 months. Her tagline right now is "Turn the page, turn the page." So she's asked, okay, well, what in the page that you're turning are you trying to get away from? And she can't figure it out. This was so devastating that even CNN had to recognize it. Now, we'll start with Scott Jennings. Of course, he's our man on the CNN panel, and he points it out here. But it wasn't just him, I'm sorry to say, for all you Democrats out there, because it's so obviously devastating what Kamala Harris just walked into. But let's start with Scott Jennings.
I mean, she is running on the slogan of a new way forward. And she said today, we're going to stay on the same path, which is, I think everyone would admit, not a popular path. I mean, Biden has put some handcuffs on her. I mean, he has gone out last week and said, she helped me pass every law. She was part of every decision. I mean, he's making it difficult for her to get any separation. And then she has also, in the last few days, said Biden is totally with it, totally vouched for his mental acuity. And today says, yeah, I can't really think of anything that I would have done differently. This must be very confusing for American voters who must be thinking, then why are you running? Why isn't he running? If he's up to it and you wouldn't change anything, then why is Joe Biden not in this race right now? I thought, but who goes on The View and gets outsmarted, by the way? I mean, this was a total disaster for her.
Although
today. I think,
By the way, there's more here, but isn't that a great line? Honestly, Jennings is just such a mensch. Who goes on The View and gets outsmarted by Sonny Hostin? It's such a great line, and it's so true. It's so true. But that's the fundamental question here. If you can't think of a single thing that you would do differently than Joe Biden, then why the hell are you even here? What's the point? Other than you check some boxes? You wear a pantsuit instead of a Brooks Brothers suit? That's it? And the answer apparently is, yeah, that's exactly it.
even some of the friendly, non-traditional interviews have not turned out that well, but her contact with the mainstream media, I mean, the 60 Minutes interview, on issue after issue, I think did not really help her campaign. The immigration answers did not help her campaign, answering the question 3 times about whether they made the right decisions on the immigration changes that let the flood of people into the country. So I think the reason they're shying away from it is because often her rhetoric doesn't survive contact with the mainstream media.
Yeah, and this is a very important point to make. They are obviously making a deliberate choice right now. They went months without talking to anyone. They wouldn't even stop to the reporter standing under the airplane as she was going up the stairs. She has not given, she went months without giving a one-on-one interview. She finally did an interview for CNN, but she had to have her comfort animal, her security blanket, Tim Walz, with her so that she wouldn't get all of the questions. They'd have to share the load. She wasn't up to any of this. And now suddenly it's a blitz. Now suddenly she's everywhere. Why? Because they're in trouble. We've shown you the polls. We do a poll segment at least once a week or twice a week to show you how they're underwater just various places, how she is seriously behind where her predecessors, Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, were at this time in the election in the states where it matters most, how she's seriously behind with Latino voters. She's seriously behind with African-American voters. We've shown you all of those data, and they know it too. The only reason she's doing all this media is because she has to. Trust me, if she were 5 points ahead right now, in all of those swing states, she wouldn't be talking to anyone, right? You know that. We all know that. So now she's doing this because she needs it. She needs to go out there and do these interviews. And even with friendly media, with Stephen Colbert and The View and 60 Minutes, 60 Minutes literally deceptively edited the interview to make her look less moronic. And even in those helpful atmospheres, in every single one of those appearances, she's got 1, 2, 3, or 4 different sound bites that are going viral that make her look awful. She can't do it. This is terrible. And yesterday at the White House, Joe Biden sort of emphasized the real problem that she's got with her candidacy and trying to separate herself from Biden.
There have obviously been a number of crises that the country has been facing over the past several days with the hurricane, with the port strike, with the situation in the Middle East. Can you talk about how your vice president, who is running for the presidency, has worked on these crises and what role she has played over the past several days?
Well, I'm in constant contact with her. She's aware we're singing from the same song sheet. She helped pass all the laws that are being employed now. She was a major player in everything we've done, including passage of legislation which we were told we could never pass. And so she's been, and her staff is interlocked with mine in terms of all the things we're doing.
So here's the question. Is this something that they've agreed to? That this is going to be his story, this is going to be her story, and there's no deviating from this path, right? Or did Joe Biden, with that appearance at the press briefing room, I think it was on Friday when he showed up, did Joe Biden sort of drive this agenda and force this on her? Like, neither Biden nor Kamala Harris has been saying anything like this until the last 5 or 6 days. All right. Kamala Harris, obviously, with turn the page, new way forward, things are too expensive. Here are my plans. Here are my policies. Vote for me and I'll do this, this, and this. When everyone's scratching their head saying, aren't you in office right now? Yeah. Are you saying that Joe Biden is blocking all of this progress? Joe Biden is keeping us from a new way forward? We're turning the page on Joe Biden. Is that the message? Because that was the message from the campaign. Subtle or not, that was the message. The next thing you know, Joe Biden independently goes out there, appears in the briefing room for the first time in his presidency, so he gets coverage everywhere. And Joe Biden says, our staffs are interlocked. We're singing from the same song page. She's been there with me on every major piece of legislation, on every decision and every initiative. And the second he did that, Kamala Harris is locked in. What's she going to do? Call the old man a liar? She's done. She's sunk. So the question is this something they both agreed on? Or did this guy, this mean-spirited, bitter, angry old bastard, did he actually play a trump card here and block Kamala Harris into this position so that there's no escaping? I want to believe it's the latter. I want to believe that this is Biden's final move, his final stab in the back to Kamala Harris. He'll have the last word. Now, let's get back over to CNN for a minute, though, because they don't need Scott Jennings or David Urban to point out the obvious about what a failure this was for Kamala Harris with this one simple question. It got much worse for Kamala over on one of her go-to reliable news outlets. Just the regular Democrats on the panels saw how bad it was.
Done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Molly, what do you make of that?
I'm surprised, frankly, that she doesn't have more to say about this, given that she and her campaign know that this is one of the main questions that voters have about her. And one of the main things she's been trying to establish as part of her candidacy is the idea that she would represent a break from the past 4 years, and to not be able to come up with something to say in that moment. She continues to not be particularly nimble on her feet in a lot of these interviews. And this is a very obvious question that gave her an opportunity, frankly, to differentiate herself in a way that would have made news, that would have answered, I think, the curiosity of a lot of voters who want to know how she would lead differently. And she's not very specific in laying that out. And she can't point to a decision she would have made differently, which, in an electorate that thinks that doesn't like the way this administration has led, and that doesn't like the track that the country is on, that may not be a very satisfactory answer.
I mean, it's a delicate dance.
It's a delicate dance. That was the bottom line there, and very well said. See, as we dive into polls, and I know you're a political junkie just like I am, and I love to break down polls for you and show you what I think is important, what isn't, but there's a lot of data for you to look at too. One poll that isn't looked at enough is the wrong track, right track poll, where you ask the American people, is our country on the right track or on the wrong track? Now, usually that's very, very important for an incumbent running for reelection. But we got a weird thing going on here right now where the incumbent was running for reelection. He voluntarily stepped down and handed it off to his vice president. So she's sort of the incumbent, but she sort of isn't. And so you look at that wrong track, right track poll, which is right now devastating for the party in power. It says wrong track. And Kamala Harris's people know that. That's why they've got Turn the Page. That's why they've got New Way Forward. That's why they're employing all this rhetoric to suggest to people that she's going to do something different, that she's going to chart a new path and a new approach with new policies. If you don't like the track we're on, Kamala's your gal, right? And in a weird way, she might be able to succeed in doing that, considering Donald Trump is a former president, right? And so she could sort of tag him with, oh, yeah, he's yesterday's news too, right? If you're a deft politician with ideas and with skills and with a brain, you could do that. Kamala is none of those things. And given the one opportunity to explain to the American people who overwhelmingly believe that America is on the wrong track, given that one opportunity to be able to say, yes, we are on the wrong track, and here's how I'm different from the guy who's led us down that wrong track, given that one opportunity, she completely whiffed. She completely whiffed. That was it. That was it. And she will not get that moment back. It's over. It's over. And so look at that wrong track, right track, and recognize that what Kamala Harris just communicated to every single voter in America is that we will stay on the same track, because I would do nothing differently than the person who has put us on this wrong track. She's toast. Absolute toast.